The sky cracked open like an egg-spilling black ships that blocked out the sun, their engines screaming like the voices of the dead, and the people of the cities looked up with hope for a moment, thinking it was rain, thinking it was light, but it was the beginning of fear. The ships moved in silence above the burning towers, and then they opened like flowers of steel, and the creature fell from them, falling like a dark star wrapped in chains of glowing red metal that burned the clouds and turned the rain to steam. And when it hit the earth, the ground shook for miles. People fell to their knees as windows shattered and alarms wailed into the choking air. And out of the crater it crawled, its skin, a shifting armor of black plates with veins of acid green pulsing under the surface, steam rising from its back as it roared, a sound that broke car alarms and made people bleed from their ears. They sent tanks to stop it, they sent jets to strike it from the sky, but the creature moved, with the hunger of a god, tearing metal apart, like wet paper crushing soldiers underfoot. As if they were insects trying to sting it, the world watched as it grabbed a tank and pulled it apart, to get to the men inside, biting them in half. As the acid dripped from its jaws, the fire reflecting in its cold alien eyes, and people screamed into their cameras, broadcasting live feeds before the creature stepped on them, ending the signal with the crunch of bones. The leaders of the world hid in bunkers, speaking to each other through trembling voices, as the Galactic Empire spoke above them, their voices calm and amused, telling the people of Earth that they had 7 days to surrender, telling them that the creature was only the first, telling them that their weapons were useless and their hope was dead. And the people believed them because the creature was walking through the cities, tearing buildings down to find the people hiding inside, pulling them into the street as it roared, spraying acid over the walls, as if marking its territory like a monster, claiming its meal. And the nights were filled with the glow of burning buildings and the screams of those who could not hide deep enough. And the creature moved on as the people ran before it, as the ashes rained from the sky like black snow. And for the first time in generations, the people of Earth felt small. They felt the weight of something they could not fight pressing down on their hearts every time the creature roared. And it was not a sound they would ever forget. It was a sound that crawled into their dreams, reminding them that the Galactic Empire had come, and that nothing would ever be the same. And in a burned forest far from the cities where the creature roared, an old hut stood on crooked legs, and inside an old woman with tangled gray hair watched the sky as the black ships moved like shadows across the stars, and she smiled a cold, empty smile as the wind whispered to her, telling her of the creature, telling her of the empire, telling her of the fear of the world. And she whispered back, "I am hungry too." The creature walked through the ruins of the city, as if it owned the ground beneath its feet, as if the air was meant to burn when it breathed. Its claws dug into the concrete roads, tearing them open with every step, acid dripping from its jaws, and hissing on the shattered glass as it sniffed the smoke-filled air, looking for movement, looking for fear. The people who had not fled were hiding in basements and tunnels, clutching children who no longer cried, only watched with empty eyes as the screams above them turned into silence. When the creature found someone it did not kill quickly, it would hold them in one claw, its eyes glowing with green fire as it listened to them scream, the acid dripping down its teeth until it decided to eat them piece by piece. The Galactic Empire above watched through the eyes of the creature. They saw the streets painted in blood and the fire rising into the night sky, and they were pleased. They spoke again to the people of Earth, telling them this was mercy, telling them to surrender before the real army came, before the sky would open again and drop more monsters, more weapons, more death. The people heard these words, and some of them believed and fell to their knees in the ashes, praying to gods who would not answer, praying to leaders who could not save them, while others hid deeper into the dark, clutching knives that would not help them when the creature came. The soldiers who tried to stop it found their bullets did nothing, found their rockets turned to steam against the black plates of its skin, found that the monster could smell them through walls and smoke, and it would pull them out one by one, crushing them in its claws, or simply dropping them from the heights of the towers it climbed like a lizard. The world was ending day by day, hour by hour, as the creature moved city by city, dragging its claws through the earth and marking it as its own. And the people who survived whispered stories about it, stories about the green blood that hissed on the ground, stories about the way it would pause before it killed, as if listening to something far away. Stories about how its eyes would turn to the sky for a moment before it roared, as if speaking to something above. And in the burned forests where the ash fell like black rain, the old woman stood outside her crooked hut, her hair moving in the cold wind, her eyes reflecting the burning horizon. She could smell the creature now, even from here, the acid and smoke, and blood. She could feel the way the ground trembled when it roared. She could hear the whispers of the bones in the forest, telling her it was coming, telling her it was hungry, telling her it was close. She smiled with cracked lips as she reached down to touch the dirt, blackened by old fires and new blood. The bones rattled softly around her ankles. The wind moved through the trees, whispering her name, Baba Yaga, and she whispered back, "Let it come." The creature moved through the forest as the burned trees cracked under its claws, the acid dripping from its jaws onto the blackened leaves, sending up smoke that curled around its feet like the ghosts of the dead. The air was heavy with ash and the smell of blood. The sky above was red with the light of burning cities far away, but here there was silence, a heavy silence that pressed against the creature as it moved deeper into the forest. It had followed the scent of fear, the faint heartbeats, hiding under the ground, the trembling of small animals too weak to run, the taste of ash and blood that led it forward. But there was something else here, something older than fear, something that made the creature pause in its steps, its green eyes glowing in the dark as it sniffed the cold air. There was a presence that pulled at it, something deep in the shadows of the trees, something that watched it. Without blinking, the creature let out a low growl that shook the branches and sent crows screaming into the red sky. But the presence did not move, did not hide, did not run. The creature lowered its head and moved forward, its claws digging into the dirt as it sniffed the air again, the acid dripping from its teeth, hissing softly on the ground. And in the clearing ahead stood a crooked hut on chicken legs, the wood blackened with old soot, the windows dark, the door creaking in the cold wind, and beside it stood the old woman, her gray hair tangled and floating around her face like smoke, her eyes empty as winter, her feet bare on the cold ash-covered earth. She looked at the creature with no fear, no hate, no mercy. The creature let out a roar that sent birds fleeing from the treetops, a roar that broke windows miles away. But the old woman only smiled, a cold, thin smile, as she lifted her hand, and the bones hanging from the branches rattled in the wind. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the trees bending slightly as if listening, as if waiting. The creature took a step forward, its claws tearing into the dirt, its eyes locked on the old woman, who stood unmoving in the cold wind. The acid dripped from its mouth onto the ground, steaming and hissing as it burned holes in the earth. The creature roared again, louder, this time as if to shake the world itself, as if to demand fear from the old woman. But she did not move, her eyes cold and empty, her smile sharp as a knife, as she whispered softly, so softly that the creature almost did not hear it, "Come to me." The bones rattled again. The wind howled through the black trees, and the creature felt something it had never felt before, something like the cold hand of death brushing against its skin, something like the weight of centuries pressing down on its back. But it took another step forward, its eyes burning with green fire, as it roared once more, and the old woman only smiled. The creature moved closer with each step. The ground cracked under its weight, the trees shook as if they would fall. The acid dripping from its mouth left a trail of smoke as it hissed on the cold black earth, its green eyes never leaving the old woman who stood barefoot in the ash, her tangled gray hair moving in the wind, her eyes empty, her smile thin as a blade. The forest was silent, watching, holding its breath, as the creature let out a roar that split the air, sending a wave of heat and sound through the trees. But the old woman did not move. She raised her hand slowly, and the bones hanging from the branches rattled softly, as if they were laughing. The creature lunged forward, its claws tearing deep trenches into the ground as it charged, its jaws opening wide, the acid dripping in thick ropes onto the earth. But the old woman took one step to the side, and the creature crashed past her, its claws digging into the dirt as it turned its head slowly, its green eyes narrowing. As it growled, the old woman stood behind it, now her cold eyes on its back, her hand still raised as she whispered words that had not been spoken in the world for 1,000 years, words that made the air heavy, words that made the creature hesitate. As it turned to face her again, the forest seemed to bend around them, the shadows growing thicker, the wind turning cold as the creature roared again, its claws slamming into the ground as it leaped toward the old woman. But she moved like smoke around its claws, stepping between them as they crushed the earth, her eyes never leaving the creature, her hand still raised as she whispered again. And the creature felt the words in its bones, felt them like cold knives sliding through its skin, the acid dripping faster now as it roared in pain and rage as it tried to swipe her away. But she was not there when its claws struck the earth. She was beside its leg, now her hand touching the black armor of its skin, and where she touched it, the black plates cracked, the green veins beneath bursting in steam, as the creature howled in pain, pulling its leg back, as it stumbled, its green eyes wide, for the first time in fear. The old woman stepped forward again, her hand touching the creature. Again and again, each touch leaving cracks in its armor, each crack hissing with green steam. As the acid blood dripped onto the ground, the forest was filled with the sound of the creature screaming, the sound of bones rattling in the wind, the sound of the old woman whispering as she stepped closer and closer, her cold eyes reflecting the green fire of the creature, as it tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The trees closed around it, the shadows thickened, the cold air pressing down on it as the old woman whispered one last word, and the creature fell to its knees, its claws sinking into the ash as it roared one final time. The creature fell to its knees, the ground cracking beneath its weight as its claws dug deep into the cold ash, its green blood dripping in heavy drops that hissed and steamed where they touched the earth. The black plates on its skin were split open like broken armor, the glowing veins beneath leaking light into the dark forest, and the air was filled with the sound of the creature breathing heavy and ragged, each breath a cloud of steam that twisted in the cold wind. The old woman stood before it, her bare feet in the ash, her tangled gray hair lifting around her like smoke, her cold eyes reflecting the green glow of the creature, her hands still raised as the bones in the trees rattled. Softly like distant laughter, the creature lifted its head slowly, its green eyes filled with something it had never felt before, something that tasted like fear as it looked at the old woman and let out a low growl that shook the trees. But the old woman only stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the creature, as she lowered her hand and whispered in the dark air. The words she spoke were soft, but they carried through the forest like a cold wind, words that pressed into the creature's mind. Like iron nails, the creature roared in pain, shaking its head as if to clear the words from its skull, but they were already there, sinking deeper with each breath. The old woman stepped closer, her cold eyes unblinking, as she reached out and placed her hand on the creature's head, her fingers pressing against the cracked black plates as the green light beneath them flared brighter. The creature screamed, a sound that made the trees tremble, a sound that rolled through the forest and out into the burning world beyond. But the old woman did not move, her hand pressed against the creature's head as she whispered again, her voice calm and empty as the bones rattled in the cold wind. The creature tried to pull back, but its legs would not move, its claws dug deeper into the earth as it roared. Again, the green blood dripping faster now, hissing as it touched the ground. The old woman's eyes reflected the glow as she leaned closer, her mouth near the creature's ear, as she whispered words that made the shadows in the forest twist and reach toward her. The creature let out another scream, a scream that cracked the air as the green light in its veins pulsed wildly, the forest filled with the sound of bones rattling and the cold wind howling as the old woman pulled her hand away, and the creature collapsed onto the ground, its breathing heavy, its body shaking as the green blood pooled around it. The old woman stood over it, her cold eyes watching as she licked her cracked lips, slowly tasting the air, as the creature's green eyes blinked up at her, filled with pain, filled with confusion. And the old woman leaned down closer, her tangled hair falling around her face as she opened her mouth slowly, her teeth sharp as broken bone, and she whispered softly into the creature's ear, "I am hungry." The creature tried to lift its head, but its strength was gone. The green light in its veins flickered like dying stars as its claws twitched in the black ash. Its breathing was slow, heavy, each breath sending steam into the cold forest air. The old woman stood over it, her cold eyes unblinking, her tangled gray hair floating in the wind as she watched the creature struggle to move, her cracked lips curled into a thin smile as she leaned closer. The bones in the trees rattled softly like a distant drum, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The creature opened its jaws to roar, but only a low, broken sound came out. Its acid drool dripped onto the ground, hissing as it burned small holes in the dirt. The old woman reached out, her thin hand pressing it against the creature's broken armor, where the green light pulsed weakly, and the creature shivered under her touch, a sound like a whimper rising from deep within its throat. The old woman's eyes glowed softly with the reflection of the green veins as she leaned closer, her breath cold against the creature's skin, as she whispered words that made the shadows in the forest twist and reach for her. The creature's eyes widened as it felt the words sinking into its bones, pulling at something deep within it, something it did not know. It had something old, something dark. The creature tried to pull away, but it could not move. Its claws sank deeper into the dirt as it let out another low, broken sound. The old woman's smile grew wider as she pressed her hand harder against the creature's skin, and the black plates cracked further, the green light spilling out like liquid fire. The bones rattled louder. Now the wind howled through the burned trees as the forest seemed to close in around them. The creature's eyes rolled back for a moment as a wave of cold moved through its body. The old woman's eyes watched every flicker of pain, every twitch of fear, as she whispered again, her voice like ice pressing into the creature's mind. The creature's body shook as it tried to resist, but the cold was already inside it, moving through its veins like poison. The old woman leaned closer, her mouth near the creature's ear. As she opened her mouth wider, her teeth, sharp as broken glass, and she bit down on the cracked armor. The creature screamed, the sound rolling through the forest like thunder, as the old woman pulled back, tearing away a piece of the black plate, green light spilling out as the creature's blood hissed and steamed where it touched her lips. The old woman's eyes closed for a moment as she tasted the blood, her cracked lips turning darker as she swallowed. The creature's scream turned to a low cry as it felt the cold spreading faster through its body. The old woman bit again, tearing away more of the black armor, more of the green lights spilling out as the bones rattled in the cold wind, the shadows dancing around them. The old woman's eyes opened as she licked the blood from her lips, her eyes locking onto the creature's terrified gaze as she whispered softly again, "I am still hungry." The creature could no longer roar, it could no longer lift its claws from the ash-soaked earth. The green veins of light in its body were flickering like the last glow of coals before they turned to black dust. Its eyes stared at the old woman, filled with something that was no longer rage, something that was no longer hunger, something that was only fear, cold and empty fear. As the old woman stepped closer again, her bare feet silent on the black dirt, her tangled gray hair moving around her face, like a shadow that had learned to breathe, her cold eyes never blinking as she watched the creature's light fade. She crouched down beside its massive head, her cracked lips curling into a thin smile as she placed her hand on the side of its face, her sharp nails digging slightly into the cracked black plates. The creature whimpered softly, the sound barely more than a breath, as it tried to turn away, but the old woman's grip was stronger than iron, and the bones in the trees rattled louder in the cold wind, as if they were laughing, as if they were singing for the feast that was about to begin. The shadows around them deepened, swirling around the old woman like a cloak of smoke as she leaned closer, her mouth near the creature's ear as she whispered words that dripped like oil into the air, words that made the creature's green eyes widen in terror, words that made the earth beneath them shiver. As the old woman opened her mouth wider, her teeth sharp as stone, her breath cold as the grave, and she bit down again, tearing away more of the black armor, more of the glowing veins as the creature's blood spilled out in a hissing steam. The old woman's cracked lips turned black as she swallowed the burning blood, her cold eyes closing for a moment as she tasted the ancient power that filled the creature's veins. The creature screamed again, but it was a thin, broken scream that was quickly lost in the cold wind as the bones rattled and the shadows danced, and the old woman bit again and again, tearing away the armor, tearing away the flesh, drinking the green light that poured from the creature like a river of burning rain. The forest was filled with the sound of the creature's dying screams, the sound of bones clattering in the cold wind, the sound of the old woman's whispers as she drank the life from the monster that had been sent to destroy her world. The Galactic Empire far above, watching through the eyes of the creature, saw only darkness, saw only the cold, empty eyes of the old woman as she looked up at them through the dying gaze of their weapon. Her lips black, her teeth sharp, her hair floating like smoke, as she smiled a thin cold smile, and whispered softly, so softly that even the stars above could hear, "Send me another one." The creature's light flickered one last time before it went dark, its massive body collapsing into the ash as the old woman stood, slowly, the green blood dripping from her lips as she looked toward the burning sky, her eyes cold and empty and hungry. The old woman stood in the cold wind as the ashes swirled around her feet. The forest was silent now, the bones in the trees hanging still as if even they were afraid to move. The green blood of the creature dripped slowly from the old woman's lips, hissing where it touched the black dirt. Her cold eyes looked up at the burning sky above her, where the ships of the Galactic Empire hung like metal vultures, waiting, watching, recording. The old woman wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of green across her cracked skin. Her tangled gray hair moved around her face as she tilted her head, listening to the whispers in the cold air, the whispers of the forest, the whispers of the shadows, the whispers of the stars above. The ground beneath her was littered with the broken black plates of the creature's armor, the steam still rising from where its blood had fallen, and the old woman stepped over its body, her bare feet silent on the ash as she walked deeper into the forest. The shadows reached for her as she passed. The bones rattled softly as if calling to her, as if thanking her for the feast. And the old woman's thin lips curled into a cold smile as she moved through the dark trees. The Galactic Empire watched her from above, their screens filled with the image of her cold eyes, her empty stare, her small, thin figure moving through the shadows, and they felt something they had not felt in thousands of years. They felt fear. The Empire had conquered worlds, they had burned cities, they had crushed empires and shattered suns, but here on this small blackened world in a forest of bones and ash, they saw something they could not control, something they could not kill, something that looked back at them through the eyes of the creature they had sent to destroy, and they felt fear. The old woman stopped in a clearing, the wind moving around her like a cold breath, and she raised her hand slowly, and the bones hanging from the trees rattled louder. The shadows around her thickened like black smoke. The ground itself seemed to shiver as she whispered words that crawled through the air like insects, words that sank into the dirt and made the earth crack. The Galactic Empire watched as the shadows moved, as the wind howled, as the bones sang in the cold dark air, and they sent another creature down from the burning sky. This one larger, stronger, filled with more fire, with more rage, with more death, but the old woman only smiled, her cold eyes reflecting the falling fire as the new creature landed in the forest, its claws crushing the bones, underfoot its roar shaking, the trees sending birds screaming into the sky, and the old woman stepped forward, her thin hand raised, her cracked lips moving as she whispered, her tangled gray hair lifting around her like smoke, and the creature roared again, the sound rolling through the forest. But the old woman did not stop. She walked toward the creature as it lowered its head to strike her down, and the shadows followed her. The bones rattled in the cold wind as the old woman opened her mouth and whispered softly again, "I am still hungry." The new creature was taller than the trees, its claws like black blades that dripped molten fire. As it stepped forward, the ground shook under its weight, the ashes rising in clouds. Around its feet, its eyes burned with red light that split the darkness, and its roar was like thunder tearing through the cold air, shaking the bones in the trees, sending cracks through the earth. But the old woman did not stop. She kept walking toward the creature, her bare feet silent on the black dirt, her tangled gray hair moving around her face like a storm, her cold eyes locked on the creature as she whispered softly. The shadows around her thickened, reaching toward the creature as it roared again, the fire in its throat spilling out in a wave of heat that burned the ash blacker, the trees bending away from the force of the scream. But the old woman kept walking, her cracked lips curling into a thin smile as she raised her hand higher, and the bones in the trees rattled so loud it was like 1,000 drums in the cold air. The creature lifted its claw to strike the old woman down, its black blades glowing with red fire as it swung, but the shadows moved faster, wrapping around the claw, pulling it down into the ash. The creature roared in confusion, enraged, trying to lift its arm, but the shadows held it like iron. The old woman stopped in front of the creature, her cold eyes looking up into its burning red gaze as she whispered again, her voice sliding through the air like ice. The creature shivered, the red light in its eyes flickering for a moment as it felt something cold, something deep, something ancient moving through its veins. The old woman raised her other hand, and the shadows moved, wrapping around the creature's other arm, pulling it down the ground, cracking under its claws as it tried to fight, but the shadows held it. The bones in the trees rattled louder. The wind howled as the old woman opened her mouth wide, her teeth sharp as broken bone, and she bit down on the creature's leg, the black armor cracking under her teeth, the fire in its veins spilling out like liquid heat, burning the ground where it fell. But the old woman did not stop. She drank the fire, her cracked lips turning black as the flames reflected in her cold eyes. The creature screamed, the sound breaking the night as it tried to pull away, but the shadows held it tighter, pulling it down as the old woman bit again, tearing away the armor, the fire spilling out in rivers around her feet. The forest was filled with the sound of the creature's screams, the sound of bones rattling in the cold wind, the sound of the old woman's whispers as she drank the fire from the creature's veins. The Galactic Empire watched from above their screens, filled with the image of the old woman drinking the fire of their strongest weapon, and they felt fear. They felt something crack deep inside. The old woman lifted her head, the fire dripping from her lips as she looked up at the burning sky, her cold eyes empty and endless as she whispered softly into the darkness, "Send me another one, and another, and another, until there are none left."